the imposing mansion of one of the wealthiest men in the United States, every servant walked in silence, afraid of awakening the master's fury. Among them was Mrs. Clara, a humble maid who dedicated her life to hard work in order to support her teenage son, Daniel. Clara knew that place was not a home of kindness but a stage for humiliation, and yet she endured in silence because she needed the job. But that morning, something would happen that would forever mark her son's life. The billionaire Mr. Richard Collins descended the grand marble staircase in his immaculate suit, wearing the same arrogant look as always. When his eyes fell on Daniel, holding the books his mother had bought with so much sacrifice, he couldn't contain himself. Before all the servants gathered in the hall, he pointed at the boy and, with a voice sharp and merciless, shouted, "You will never be anything. Never. Sons of maids are born to serve, not to dream." Silence fell instantly. His words echoed like thunder, wounding not only the boy's heart but also the mother's, who trembled with shame and pain. Daniel lowered his head, feeling hot tears stream down his face. In that instant, his soul was branded with a wound that would never be forgotten. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. It was a sunny morning in New York. The gardens of the Collins mansion were perfectly trimmed, the grass so green it looked painted, and the sweet scent of freshly watered flowers filled the air. But behind all that beauty, the atmosphere was heavy with fear and tension. Richard Collins, one of the wealthiest and most feared men in the city, was preparing to host an important business lunch. As always, the servants rushed nervously to meet every demand. Among them was Clara, the longest-serving maid, adjusting her worn-out uniform discreetly. Her tired eyes carried years of humiliation, yet her faith in God kept her standing. At her side, helping to carry trays, was her 15-year-old son, Daniel. The boy, tall for his age, had an intelligent, curious gaze. While assisting his mother, he clutched a small blue notebook against his chest, a notebook where he scribbled notes, equations, and dreams whenever he found a moment. "Son, put that notebook away," Clara whispered, her voice trembling with caution. "You know how Mr. Collins reacts whenever he sees you studying." Daniel sighed but obeyed. Before closing it, he glanced at the pages filled with math exercises, English phrases, and dreams written as if they were secret confessions. But he had no time to hide it. Richard Collins descended the grand staircase, immaculate in his light gray suit. Each step of his polished shoes echoed through the marble hall, demanding silence. His sharp eyes immediately spotted the notebook. He stopped, his expression turning into a frown of disdain. "What's that?" he asked, his voice grave and cutting. The entire hall froze. The clinking of dishes, the sweeping, the murmurs. Everything ceased. Not a single servant dared to breathe. Daniel tried to answer, but fear choked his voice. Richard stepped closer, snatched the notebook from his hands, and flipped through it. He found pages of calculations, essays, and dreams scribbled with trembling handwriting. His lips curled into a cruel smirk. "Well, well," he said, lifting the notebook for everyone to see. "So the maid's boy thinks he can be somebody." The servants avoided eye contact. Shame spread across the room like a shadow. Then Richard's voice thundered, echoing through the marble walls. "You will never be anything. Never. Do you hear me? Sons of maids are born to serve, not to dream." The words crashed down like stones. Daniel's chest tightened, his face burned, and tears welled up in his eyes. His breathing grew heavy as the silence of the hall magnified his humiliation. Clara, desperate, rushed to her son's side. "Please, Mr. Collins, he's done nothing wrong. He's just a boy with dreams." Richard cut her off with a mocking laugh. "Dreams? People like you don't get to dream." With disdain, he threw the notebook to the floor. The pages scattered across the polished marble. Daniel knelt quickly, scrambling to pick them up. But before he could, Richard stomped on them with his polished shoe, grinding the paper beneath his heel. "Look closely, boy," Richard said coldly. "This is what happens to dreams of people like you." Clara's heart shattered. She dropped to her knees beside her son, helping him gather the crumpled, dirty pages. In a trembling whisper, she said, "Don't cry, son. God sees everything." But Daniel couldn't hold it in. Tears streamed down his face uncontrollably. Clutching the notebook to his chest, he stood and ran out of the mansion, his sobs echoing as he disappeared through the grand doors. Richard turned back to the servants, his voice sharp with warning. "Let this be a lesson to all of you. In this house, everyone must know their place." Silence fell again. The servants lowered their heads, too afraid to speak, though indignation burned in many hearts. That night, in their small wooden home on the outskirts of the city, Daniel sat in silence at the dinner table. His plate of rice and beans grew cold in front of him. Clara, forcing a fragile smile, reached for his hand. "Son, don't listen to his words. You were born for more." Daniel looked at her, his eyes still swollen from crying. "Mom, what if he's right? What if I'll never be anything?" Clara drew a deep breath, holding his hand tightly. "He may have money, he may have power, but he doesn't have God in his heart, and a man without God doesn't decide anyone's future. Remember, son, God never abandons the righteous." Daniel didn't reply, but inside, something was stirring. The echo of Richard's cruel cry still wounded him, but now it burned like a challenge. Without realizing it that very night, Daniel began to shape the path that would one day silence the man who humiliated him in front of everyone. The sun had not yet risen when Daniel left home with his light backpack and his heavy heart. The chilly morning wind swept through the narrow streets of his humble neighborhood, where wooden houses leaned against each other as if asking permission to exist. The clock read 5:40. Another day was beginning. At the bus stop, two boys from school stood in branded jackets and spotless sneakers, laughing loudly at a video on a phone. The laughter changed when they noticed Daniel approaching. "Look who's here, the genius," one sneered, tilting his chin in mockery. "Careful not to dirty the bus with your books," the other added, setting off a round of snickers. Daniel said nothing. He had learned that answering back only made things worse. When the bus groaned to a stop, he climbed aboard and found a seat by the window, clutching his battered notebook, the same one Richard Collins had stomped on, like it held his very soul. Midway through the ride, a woman glanced at him and quickly clutched her purse to her chest as if his mere presence was a threat. The sight stung, but Daniel turned his eyes away, swallowing the ache. The bus carried on toward the city, past glittering store windows displaying things that felt like they belonged to another world. The classroom. At school, the corridors buzzed with noise. Posters lined the walls with colorful slogans. "Believe in your dreams." "College is for everyone." Daniel paused in front of one. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry, because for many here, everyone didn't mean kids like him. In history class, Mrs. Whitaker handed back last week's exams. Her glasses slid down her nose as she hurried from desk to desk. "Brandon A., well done," she said with a bright smile for the blond boy in the back row, son of a wealthy investor and a close friend of Richard Collins. "Daniel, C+." Her voice dropped flat. "You've improved a little, but I'm not sure this pace will be enough. You know what I mean." He knew exactly what she meant. The sentence didn't need finishing. Brandon turned with a smug grin. "Hey, C+, at least you're average, right?" he whispered, sparking laughter around him. Daniel's chest tightened. He looked at the paper in front of him. He had studied until his eyes burned, but it never seemed enough. Enough for who? For what? The well-meaning advice. Later that day, he was summoned to the guidance office. The plaque on the door read, "Build your future here." Inside, Ms. Clarkson, the counselor, smiled politely. "Daniel, please sit. I've been watching your progress. You are hard-working, that's clear. But college, it's expensive, competitive. Have you thought about a trade? Mechanics, maintenance? Those are honorable paths, more realistic." The word realistic pierced him like a blade. In her world, realistic meant giving up before even trying. He swallowed. I want to study law. Ms. Clarkson tilted her head, the way adults do when indulging a child's impossible wish. Law is a long road. It requires reading, debating, networking. Daniel, sometimes life demands that we be practical. Talk to your mother. Think it over. He left her office smaller than when he'd entered. The hallway stretched endlessly before him. The cafeteria. At lunch, the line in the cafeteria moved slowly, trays clattering and voices echoing. When it was his turn, the lunch lady frowned at his card. Balance insufficient for dessert. Just the basics. Someone muttered behind him. He's probably used to it. Daniel took his plate and sat alone. His portion seemed smaller than the others. Maybe it was just his imagination, maybe not. The group project. That afternoon, the class split into groups for a science project. Brandon quickly decided Daniel would do the grunt work. Gather data, create spreadsheets. You're good with numbers, right? Brandon said, clapping him on the shoulder as if handing him an award. We'll handle the important part, the presentation. Daniel stayed silent and did the work. At home that night, he typed every detail, checked every figure, and submitted on time. 2 days later, when Brandon and his friends presented, Daniel's name was barely mentioned. Excellent work, boys, Mrs. Whitaker praised. Daniel, you should try to be more participative. He smiled faintly. Participative. The perfect word for erasing someone who built everything but was never allowed to stand in the spotlight. The grocery store. On his way home, Daniel stopped at the market for bread and milk. The security guard followed him down 3 aisles, failing to hide it. At the checkout, the cashier examined the discount bread he'd chosen. Are you sure that's the right price? These promotions don't always apply to everyone. Everyone who? Daniel wondered, but said nothing. He paid quietly and walked out, the paper bag pressed tightly against his chest. The open wound. At home, the neighbor's TV blared through thin walls. Businessman's son accepted into elite university. Daniel's chest constricted again. He remembered Richard's cruel voice, the stomp on his notebook, Ms. Clarkson's realistic tone. That evening, Clara came home, exhausted yet carrying that unshakable hope in her eyes. How was school, my son? Normal. Normal as in bearable or normal as in painful? She knew his silences too well. Daniel hesitated. Mom, maybe I should stop. Get a steady job. Help more at home. College feeling too far away. Clara cupped his face in her hands roughened by years of labor, yet gentle enough to mend wounds medicine couldn't reach. Son, don't ask me to accept your surrender. I can endure anything but not watching you bury the gift God placed inside you. I raised you to look upward, not downward. But they remind me every day that I don't belong to them. And then listen to the one who belongs to us, God. She hugged him tight. God does not abandon the righteous. If the world slams doors, he opens windows, one by one. The church. On Sunday, they went to the small church in their neighborhood. The choir sang softly, warm light filling the sanctuary. The pastor spoke of David and Goliath. Sometimes Goliath wears a suit, he said. And sometimes David looks too small, but God is the stone that never misses its mark. Daniel closed his eyes. The words entered like medicine. A part of him wanted to believe. Another part whispered, faith doesn't pay tuition. The decision he almost made on Monday morning, before leaving for school, he opened a drawer and pulled out an old flyer. College Fair, Scholarships and Opportunities. He had taken it the year before, secretly, ashamed of being caught dreaming. His eyes ran over the words until they landed on law, access, and mentorship programs. For a moment, courage flickered. Then Brandon's mocking laugh returned in his mind. Ms. Clarkson's warning, Richard's shoe grinding his notebook. He nearly tore the flyer in half. His hands trembled. Son, Clara's voice called from the kitchen. You'll be late. He froze, then carefully folded the flyer and stuffed it deep inside his backpack. The last blow of the day. Back at school, Mrs. Whitaker returned the science project grades. "A, well done, boys." Brandon grinned, patting Daniel's back. "We crushed it. If you ever need, I can ask my dad to get you a job. In the warehouse." The smile cut sharper than any insult. Later, Ms. Clarkson caught him in the hallway. "Daniel, about our talk. There's a maintenance position opening here at school. Part-time. Maybe it's good for you to start finding your path." Finding your path. The phrase circled in his head like a compass always pointing down. The weight of existing. On his way home, rain clouds gathered. A drizzle began to fall as he walked, shielding his backpack. At a newsstand, glossy magazines showed young students smiling on pristine campuses. Their faces glowed with confidence. Daniel's reflection on the plastic cover was blurry, distant. Back in his room, he pulled the flyer from his bag. He traced the word scholarship with his finger as if touching a wound. "Not for me," he whispered. He folded it again and walked toward the trash bin. Stopped, stepped back. Unfolding it, his eyes caught a small line at the bottom he hadn't noticed before. "Special program for low-income students with academic excellence and community service. Applications open until April 30th. The date. Only weeks away. His heart raced. Outside, Clara's voice came through the door. "Daniel, dinner's ready, son. And thank you for not giving up today." He looked at the flyer again. Silently, he slid it inside the battered notebook Richard had stomped on. This time, he hid it not as shame, but as a seed. The rain outside grew heavier. But for the first time in days, Daniel felt he might know where to place his next step. Night pressed against the small window of Daniel's room like a heavy blanket. The house was quiet, the kind of tired quiet that settles after a long day. In the kitchen, a single bulb hummed softly. In his room, a cheap desk lamp flickered to life, painting a warm circle of light over a battered notebook and a second-hand dictionary with a cracked spine. On his wall, a calendar hung crooked. April. A red pen had circled April 30 3 times. Daniel opened his notebook. Across the top of a blank page he wrote in careful block letters, "Scholarship Essay, Draft 1." He stared at the page. Words refused to come. Then, like rain finding a seam, the first line broke through. "I learned early that some people speak to you as if your future were already decided, but I also learned that God writes longer stories than they do." He paused, surprised by his own sentence. Then he kept going, slow at first, then faster, until pages began to fill with his life. The smell of bleach on his mother's hands, the marble gleam of the Collins mansion, a shoe grinding his notebook into the floor, the way humiliation tastes when you swallow it so no one sees. He wrote until the lamp burned hot and the letters blurred. When he finally stopped, the clock read 2:17 a.m. From the narrow bed in the next room, Clara coughed softly in her sleep. Daniel closed the notebook and whispered into the dark, "God, if you're listening, if there's still a way, show me the next step." The library after hours. The public library became his sanctuary. During the day, it was a maze of whispering aisles. After school, it was a haven where the air smelled of paper and dust and possibility. The computers along the back wall were slow, but they were connected to something wider than the world that kept telling him no. Ms. Rivera, the evening librarian with kind eyes and a braid that fell to her waist, noticed him returning every day. "You close the place down more than I do," she teased, stamping due dates. "Working on something big?" "Just trying," he said. "Trying is the first miracle," she replied. "If the internet stalls, try number 7. It's the stubborn one." On the third night that week, the library's clock ticked toward closing. Daniel pulled up the scholarship portal and read the prompt again. "Tell us about a moment that changed your life and what you did after it." He typed, "A man told me I would never be anything. I decided to learn the law that would prove him wrong." He stopped, deleted, rewrote, deleted again. He didn't want to sound bitter. He wanted to sound true. A seed of service. The application asked for community service. The words tightened his chest. Community service meant time, the one thing he felt he had traded away to survive. Then he remembered the church kitchen. Once a week, the church served hot meals to people who needed them. He had been there a few times with Clara, but never consistently. The next evening, he showed up in an apron 2 sizes too big and began to chop onions beside Mrs. Coleman, a church elder with a laugh as round as her cheeks. "You came," she said, approving. "Hands washed, heart ready. That's all the training you need." Daniel chopped until his eyes stung. He served plates. He cleaned counters. And when a group of little kids from the neighborhood finished eating and began their homework at a side table, he found himself kneeling beside one, then another, explaining fractions, then grammar. "You're good at this," Mrs. Coleman whispered later, watching him help a girl spell courage. "It makes the math make sense," he said, surprised by his own voice, "when someone finally shows you how." "Then come back Thursday," she grinned. "They'll be waiting." He did. And the Thursday after that. A door cracks open. Back at the library, the security guard made his rounds with a quiet step and a thermos of black coffee. Mr. Bennett was in his 60s with a face mapped by time and a gait that suggested old injuries healed only halfway. He usually nodded and moved on. But that night he stopped behind Daniel's chair. "Law schools, huh?" Bennett read over his shoulder, careful not to intrude. "College first?" Daniel said, a little embarrassed. "Pre-law, maybe. Scholarships if I'm lucky." Bennett took a slow sip. Luck is just preparation meeting a door that finally cracks open. Daniel risked a smile. "You sound like a teacher." "Close. Court clerk once, downtown. Too many years ago. Saw a lot. Took notes nobody asked for." He reached into his bag and pulled out a worn paperback with creased corners. The title read, "Just Mercy." "I don't lend this much," Bennett said, placing it gently on the desk. "But something about the way you hold that keyboard, like it's heavy. Bring it back when you're done. Check the inside cover." After Bennett disappeared down the aisle, Daniel opened the book. On the inside cover in faded ink, "Never accept the limits others imagine for you." Underneath, a name and a date nearly 20 years old. Daniel pressed his thumb to the words like they were warm. The cost of testing. The scholarship portal listed requirements like stones in a river, transcripts, essay, recommendation letters, test scores. Test scores. He clicked the registration page. His stomach dropped at the fee. He went to Ms. Rivera. "Is there a way to take it without?" She understood before he finished. "Fee waivers," she nodded. "If your counselor signs. I'll print the forms. Bring proof of income if you have it." "My mother keeps everything," he said. "We could build a house out of envelopes she never threw away." "Good," Ms. Rivera smiled. "Then bring the bricks." He returned with papers in a rubber-banded stack. Pay stubs, utility bills, letters from the church for food drives. Ms. Rivera helped him assemble them like a puzzle. Then came the counselor's signature. Ms. Clarkson skimmed the form, brows pinched. "Daniel, these waivers are limited. We prioritize students with a realistic plan." "I have one," he said, steady. "Are you sure law is your path?" "I don't know if it's my destination," he said, surprising himself with the words, "but I'm certain it's my next step." She studied him, pen hovering, then signed, reluctantly, like blessing rain she didn't believe would fall. Pages against the night days blurred into a rhythm. School, church kitchen, library. Sleep became a luxury he bartered in exchange for paragraphs that started to make sense and sentences that finally sounded like him. He rewrote the essay 6 times. In draft 3, he confessed he hated being pitied. In draft 4, he admitted he loved the sound of pages turning in a silent room. In draft 5, he wrote the sentence he had been afraid to write. "I want to learn the law not to escape where I come from, but to honor it, to stand where my mother cannot and say, in the language courts understand, that her life matters." He kept draft 5. The mentor he didn't expect. On a rain-slick Thursday, Mr. Bennett found him packing up at closing time. "You'll need a recommendation," Bennett said, leaning on the desk. "I don't have anyone," Daniel admitted. "Someone who knows me like that." "I know enough," Bennett said. "I've watched you. People think security sees nothing. We see everything. You show up. You help kids. You rewrite until the words stop lying. That's character." Daniel felt heat climb his face. "But you barely know me." "Son, you can tell a lot about a person by how they treat silence." Bennett gave him an email address and a promise. Mrs. Coleman, from church, offered a second letter the same night. It was starting to look possible. Not easy, just possible. The temptation to shrink Brandon cornered him near the lockers the next morning, flanked by two friends. "Heard you're applying for one of those special scholarships," Brandon grinned. "Nice. Maybe they'll grade you on a curve for feelings." Daniel's jaw tightened. He said nothing. He didn't have time to bleed words on people who would only use them as knives. That afternoon, Ms. Clarkson called him again. "Trade job fair is next week. Same day as the scholarship interview. If you get one," she said. "I can put your name down now. It's smart to hedge your bets." Hedge your bets. He wanted to say, "I hedge them every time I breathe." Instead, schedule me for the interview that doesn't exist yet. That's not how scheduling works. "Then I'll make it work," he said, surprising even himself. The countdown, April 28th. The scholarship portal said 48 hours left. The essay was ready. Transcripts uploaded, community service logged. One recommendation letter had arrived. The second, Mr. Bennett's, was pending. On April 29th at 11:12 p.m., his phone buzzed. Bennett letter received. Relief coursed through him like breath after drowning. He opened the application page and began the final review. The cursor hovered over submit. The library was closed. He was home, internet piggybacking off a neighbor's spotty signal with permission she gave Clara, for homework uses. The signal faltered, then returned. The clock on his screen read 11:56 p.m. He clicked submit. The page spun and stalled. "No, no, no," he whispered, palms sweating. He hit refresh. The screen went white. Then a red banner appeared. "Error, missing required item, verification of community service hours." He blinked. He had logged them. How? He scrolled frantically. A small note pulsed in orange. Third-party verification link sent to supervising organization. Submission incomplete until verified. He checked his email. Nothing. He checked the church inbox he had created for Mrs. Coleman. Nothing. The clock read 11:58 p.m. Daniel grabbed his hoodie. "Mom, I need the church key," he called, breathless. The office email, the verification. Clara, already stepping into her shoes. "I'll go with you." They ran into the night. The rain had stopped, but the streets glistened with leftover fear. At the church, Clara's hands shook as she unlocked the basement office. The old desktop coughed awake like an engine from another century. 11:59 p.m. The inbox loaded. An email sat at the top. Action required. Verify community service for applicant Daniel S. They opened it. The link would not click. Daniel copied, pasted, hit enter. 11:59:34. A form appeared. Confirm hours. Confirm role. Comments. Clara typed, slower than he wanted, but careful, so careful, about the truth. 11:59:51. She hit submit. The form froze, then flashed green. Verification received. Daniel sprinted back to his application tab. The red banner had turned gray. All items received. Submit now? He clicked submit. The page blinked once, twice, then filled with a simple line of text. "Thank you. Your application has been received." He sagged in his chair. Clara pressed her hands to her mouth, eyes wet. They sat in silence that felt like prayer. The cliff's edge. On the walk home, Daniel's phone buzzed again. An email preview popped up on the cracked screen. Subject: regarding your application, Additional information needed. From Scholarship C. His stomach dropped. He opened it. The message began. Dear Daniel, thank you for your submission. Before your application can move to the next round, we require... He stopped reading. The words blurred as the streetlight flickered above them. Clara touched his elbow. Whatever it is, we face it. He nodded, throat tight. The dream was no longer secret. It was exposed now, out in the open, where doors can slam or open wide. The subject line glowed on Daniel's cracked screen like a warning flare. Regarding your application, additional information needed. He and Clara stood under a flickering streetlight outside the church, breath clouding in the cool night air. Daniel opened the email. Dear Daniel, thank you for your submission. Before your application can move to the next round, we require original proof of residence, no photocopies. Notarized letter confirming household income. Verified community service supervisor's phone number, landline preferred. Official test registration confirmation by 5 p.m. Friday. Please note, documents must be delivered in person during office hours. Montfrey, 10 a.m., 2 p.m. Daniel read the last line twice. 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Hours designed for people who could leave work without losing rent. Clara touched his arm. We'll make it happen, she said softly. One paper at a time. Paper walls. The next morning, Daniel entered the school office just as the first bell rang. Ms. Clarkson glanced at the email and tightened her lips. Notarized letter, she said. Your mother will have to pay for that. Is there a free option? Sometimes the bank will do it if you have an account, do you? He shook his head. The look she gave him wasn't cruel. It was worse. It was the weary certainty of someone who had already decided how his story ended. I can print your proof of residence if you bring the utility bill, she added. But originals only, remember? He thanked her and backed away, feeling the hallway narrow around him. At lunch, he sprinted to the library. Ms. Rivera printed the email, highlighted the list, and drew tiny checkboxes beside each item. Original bill, she said, ticking the first square. Notarized letter. Let's see who in the neighborhood handles notarization. Some places do it for free on Thursdays. She typed fast. There, community legal aid, walk-in clinic. Tonight, 6 to 8 p.m. Bring your documents. Daniel exhaled, a small relief. And the landline? He asked. They want a landline for my service supervisor. Ms. Rivera grinned. Then we're going to pretend this is 1998. Ask the church if their main line can forward to Mrs. Coleman during the day, or have her sit near the office phone for a few afternoons. It's silly, but we do silly things to move mountains, he finished, surprising them both with a smile. Gatekeepers. By 5:50 p.m., Daniel and Clara sat in plastic chairs at the community legal aid office. The walls were lined with flyers about tenants' rights and driver's licenses, their corners curled from humidity. A volunteer attorney with kind eyes and sleeves rolled to the elbows called their names. I'm Mr. Alvarez, he said. Let's see what we've got. They spread their life across the desk. Pay stubs, a wrinkled electric bill, letters from church, the scholarship email with its tidy demands. Alvarez read everything carefully. Notarization? Sure, he said. We can notarize your income letter today. Proof of residence is fine. This bill will do. As for the landline, have your supervisor list the church's main number. We'll add a note that she's available during specific hours. He wrote quickly, efficient, and precise. And the test confirmation? I have a fee waiver, Daniel said, but the registration page keeps timing out. I'll try at the library again. Alvarez slid the fresh notarized letter across the desk. I don't usually say this, he said, eyes steady, but you're doing everything right. Systems aren't built for straight lines. You'll zigzag. Keep going. Clara blinked fast, fighting tears. God bless you, she whispered. He already did, Alvarez replied, smiling. You showed up. Office hours only. Thursday, 10:45 a.m. Daniel stood in the Scholarship Foundation's lobby, a towering marble space so glossy he could see his reflection bend in the floor. He had asked his teachers for permission to miss the morning. Most said yes quickly. Mrs. Whitaker paused, then nodded, as if granting a favor that might not matter. Behind the glass reception desk, a woman with perfect nails scanned his documents without looking up. Original bill, check. Notarized letter, check. Service contact. Landline, good. Now we just need the applicant present for a brief screening. I'm the applicant. She finally raised her eyes, measuring his worn jacket and his tired face. Screening room 1, she said. Down the hall. The room was small, the fluorescent light too bright. A man with a clipboard sat across from him. No smile. This is a merit-based scholarship, the man said. We look at academic excellence and leadership. His eyes flicked to Daniel's transcript. C+ in history. It's climbing, Daniel replied, voice even. I've been balancing. We have many applicants with straight A's, the man cut in. From competitive schools. Daniel nodded slowly. I know. I'm not asking you to lower the bar. I'm asking you to see how high I'm jumping to reach it. The man's pen paused. Then he scribbled something Daniel couldn't read. Your essay mentions community service. We'll need direct verification. And please list any family contributions to the foundation. Family contributions? Yes. Donations. Sponsorship attendance. Our gala. He tapped the form. It helps contextualize candidate engagement. Engagement. Daniel thought of Clara's swollen feet and the rent due on the 1st. He thought of gilded tables he would never sit at. We don't have contributions, he said. But if you want engagement, come to the church kitchen on Thursday. I'll be there. The man stared at him for a beat too long, then, you'll be notified if you advance to the interview round. The elevator conversation. Daniel stepped back into the lobby, holding his receipt like a lifeline. As he pressed the elevator button, laughter burst behind him. He turned. Brandon strolled in wearing a tailored blazer, parents on either side. His father clapped someone on the back. His mother linked fingers with a board member Daniel had just seen on a framed photo. Danny, Brandon said, spotting him. Didn't know they let walk-ins on Thursdays. They let people with documents, Daniel said quietly. Brandon smirked. We're here dropping off tickets for the gala. My dad's company's a platinum sponsor. See you at the winner's brunch? The elevator doors opened. Daniel stepped in alone. The doors slid shut on Brandon's grin. Inside the elevator, the mirror threw back a thin reflection. He straightened his collar, then forced his shoulders back until they listened. When the doors opened at street level, a thin strip of sky cut across the top of the city like hope you could barely measure. Stalled again. That night at the library, Daniel pulled up the testing site. Slot selection spun until the screen froze. Don't you dare, he muttered, refreshing. Ms. Rivera was already behind him with a backup plan. Testing center on 12th Street has 2 seats left for Saturday, she said. If this site crashes, we'll call first thing in the morning, and if you can't get there, I'll get there. Bus passes, she added, sliding 2 across the desk. From the Friends of the Library Fund, anonymous donors, loud librarians. He smiled. You're not loud. I am when doors pretend to be walls. The page finally loaded. Registered, Saturday 9 a.m. Daniel exhaled a laugh he didn't know he had stored. Who verified your hours? Friday morning, Daniel's phone rang during homeroom. Unknown number. He stepped into the hallway. This is the Scholarship Foundation. A woman's voice said. We're verifying community service hours for your application. Yes, ma'am. Your supervisor listed a church address. Is there a corporate partner who can verify? He blinked. It's a church kitchen, ma'am. We feed families. My supervisor is Mrs. Coleman. We prefer corporate partners. Daniel's voice stayed calm by force of will. We prefer to feed hungry kids. Silence. Then, we'll make a note. He hung up, pulse hammering. A minute later, his phone buzzed again. This time it was Mrs. Coleman. They called me, baby, she said. I told them exactly what you do. You chop onions, You serve with both hands, and then you fix math that teachers broke. I told them you show up when you're tired and you smile when you don't feel like it. If they can't count those hours, they're bad at math." Daniel laughed, tears catching him off guard. "Thank you. Now go pass that test tomorrow," she said. "I'll be praying a hedge around your mind." The test Saturday, 8:12 a.m. Daniel stood outside the testing center with a clear plastic bag, ID, pencils, snack, faith. Other students huddled in branded sweatshirts, trading last-minute tips like currency. He stood apart, hands sunk into his jacket pockets, eyes steady on the door. Inside, a proctor recited rules. No watches, no phones, no miracles, only what you brought inside your head. When the first section began, Daniel's palms were damp. The words pulsed on the page. His mind threatened to run back to every closed door. He made it stand still. One question, then the next. Read, breathe, answer. He heard Mr. Bennett's voice in his memory. "You can tell a lot about a person by how they treat silence." He treated it like a friend. During the break, he ate a granola bar and stared at a tree outside the window. Wind curled through its leaves. He thought of David and Goliath, of stones and aim. He went back in. When it was over, he walked out into light that felt different. Not because he knew his score, he didn't, but because he had refused to be afraid of the room. A small victory. Monday morning, an email pinged during first period. Daniel held his breath. Subject: Application status update. He opened it. "Dear Daniel, your application has advanced to the next round. Interview scheduled, Thursday, 11:30 a.m. Location: Collins Center, 18th floor, room 3. He read the location again. Collins Center. The name sat in his throat like a dare. Brandon would probably be there, armed with platinum sponsors and perfect teeth. Board members would drift like clouds with soft shoes and hard questions. Richard Collins's empire would be printed on every wall. Daniel forwarded the email to Clara. A second later, his phone rang. "We'll be ready," she said, voice steady. "I'll alter Mr. Bennett's jacket for you tonight. Mrs. Coleman will press your shirt. Pastor said we can use the church printer for your resume, and I'll be outside that building praying you up 18 floors." He closed his eyes, letting her words fill the places fear had hollowed. "Mom?" "Yes, my son. I'm going to walk into his building and tell my story like it belongs there." "It already does," she said. The breath before the door. Thursday felt like a held breath. Mr. Bennett met him in the library lobby that morning with a tie knotted just right. "You don't need this to be you," Bennett said, straightening the knot. "But sometimes it helps the gatekeepers pretend they see you." He handed Daniel a folded note. "For after." Daniel slid it into his pocket without looking, afraid he'd cry if he did. At 11:24 a.m., he stood in front of the Collins Center. Glass soared above him into a sky that seemed to be holding its own breath. He saw his reflection in the doors, tie neat, shoulders squared. Behind the glass, elevators blinked like eyes. Clara's text buzzed. "I'm here. I love you. God goes before you." Daniel placed his hand on the door handle. Somewhere above, on the 18th floor, a room waited. Maybe mercy, maybe judgment. He pushed the door open. Dawn. The apartment breathed in whispers, the kettle clicking, the soft scrape of an iron, the rustle of fabric in careful hands. Clara stood at the small table, sleeves rolled to the elbows, pressing a white shirt until it looked like resolve. Beside the iron, a worn Bible lay open, a sprig of ribbon holding Psalm 37 in place. She sewed the loose button on Mr. Bennett's old suit jacket with thread the color of quiet dignity. Every stitch was a prayer. "Lord," she murmured, "go where he cannot go. Speak where his voice trembles. Make favor remember his name." On the back of a chair, a brown paper bag waited, a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, an apple polished against her sleeve, a handwritten note folded 3 times. 6:12 a.m. Daniel stepped from his room dressed in the kind of neat that isn't money but looks like courage when you stand up straight. The tie sat obediently at his collar. He hesitated in the doorway, suddenly 12 again, suddenly small. Clara turned and smiled that smile that had carried both of them through storms. "Let me see," she said, tugging a seam, smoothing a shoulder. "A man." He laughed softly. "A son," he corrected. Clara kissed his cheek and slipped the paper bag into his hand. "Eat after. And this." She tucked the folded note into his breast pocket. "Read only when you need it." "What is it?" "Oil for the lamp," she said, "for when the room feels dark." Footsteps and flashbacks. The bus growled down the avenue, its windows flashing reflections of steel and sky. Daniel claimed a seat by the window, the city unspooling like film. He touched the folded note in his pocket and didn't open it. Not yet. A memory rose, uninvited and welcome all at once. 3rd grade, a teacher sighing as she handed him a worksheet. "Maybe this is too much for you, sweetie." The room had tilted, small snickers the burn in his face, until Clara appeared at the door at pickup, listening to the teacher's polite doubt. Later at home, she had spread pennies on the table and turned math into a game. "Count with your hands, not with their limits," she'd said, and he had. Another memory, tighter at the edges. The night the rent went up, and Clara skipped dinner with a joke about not being hungry, then slipped a second-hand dictionary onto his pillow as if angels delivered it. "If they lock rooms with words," she'd said, "you'll learn the keys." The bus lurched and the present returned, glass towers, morning rush, the hum of a city that judged by suits and shoes. A circle of prayer, 8:07 a.m. Before the Collins Center, Clara stood in a small circle with Mrs. Coleman and the pastor. They held hands on the sidewalk as people streamed by in hurry and perfume. "Heavenly Father," the pastor prayed, voice low as thunder far off, "give this young man the tongue of the learned and the heart of the humble. Close the mouths that speak against him and open the doors no man can shut." A bicycle bell trilled, a taxi barked, but within their circle, peace. Clara's eyes shone. "Amen." She texted Daniel, "I'm outside. I love you. God goes before you." 8:11 a.m. He replied, "I know. I feel it." The waiting room, 11:18 a.m. The Collins Center lobby was a cathedral to wealth. Glass like water, stone like ice, art that pretended not to look at you while it judged. An assistant led Daniel to room 3, waiting area. There were 3 other candidates, a girl in a navy blazer murmuring facts to herself, a boy polishing his resume with a gold pen, and Brandon, in a tailored jacket that fit like inherited confidence. Brandon's smile was all surface. "Didn't know they let church kids pass security," he said lightly. "Relax, Danny. Just be yourself." "That's the plan," Daniel answered steady. A receptionist named Ruth, gray hair, kind eyes, badge tilted, handed out water cups. Her hand lingered a fraction longer when she reached Daniel, as if squeezing courage into his palm. "Breathe from your belly," she whispered like a grandmother, not an employee. Big rooms love to scare good voices. He nodded, surprised at how much he needed to hear it. Through the glass wall, the interview panel sat at a long table. Mrs. Latham, foundation director, pearls like winter. Mr. Hale, finance, jaw set to skeptical. Dr. Patel, education, eyes curious behind rimless glasses. And Ms. Green, civil rights attorney, posture like a promise. Names on placards, names that held doors and sometimes slammed them. An unexpected ally. The waiting room door opened and Mr. Alvarez, the legal aid attorney, stepped in, talking quickly with a staffer about document compliance. He stopped when he saw Daniel. "You made it," Alvarez said, warm surprise breaking across his face. "Come here." Brandon's eyes narrowed. The staffer paused. Alvarez shook Daniel's hand in a way that said, "I see you," then pulled a sealed envelope from his satchel. "I filed a character affidavit for you," he said, lowering his voice but not hiding his pride. "Standard addendum. Verifies service leadership and persistence in the face of structural barriers. Some committees forget to ask the right questions. He turned to the staffer. Please add this to candidate SE's file. Timestamp it. The staffer glanced from Alvarez's barcard lanyard to the envelope. Yes, sir. From the interview room, Ms. Green looked up through the glass at the commotion. Her gaze found Daniel. Something softened at the edges of her expression. Alvarez clapped Daniel's shoulder. You don't owe me anything, he said. Just remember people helped you. Help back. I will. As Alvarez left, Brandon's father breezed by in a boardroom handshake parade. He didn't see Daniel, and that was its own kind of seeing. The note in his pocket. Ruth called. Candidate S, you're after this next one. Daniel's stomach fluttered. He slipped a hand into his breast pocket and finally unfolded Clara's note. When fear knocks, let faith answer the door. If your voice shakes, that's just your heart standing up. I'm right outside. Mom. Beneath her handwriting, another small square of paper, different ink. Mr. Bennett's neat block letters. 3 beats. Who you are. What you've overcome. Why you'll multiply what they invest. Speak slow. Let silence do some of the lifting. Daniel closed his eyes and breathed from his belly, just like Ruth had said. He pictured the church kitchen, Mrs. Coleman's laugh, Ms. Rivera's stubborn computer, the library's hum, Alvarez's steady pen, Bennett's quiet watchfulness, his mother's hands, always his mother's hands. A mother's walk outside. Clara paced the sidewalk, thumb tracing the edge of her Bible. She stopped at the revolving door and laid a hand on the glass as if she could transmit warmth through it. A woman in a suit paused beside her. Are you all right? My son is inside, Clara said, chin lifting. He's telling the truth about who he is. The woman smiled, something respectful in it. Then he is already farther than most. The room where it happens. Ruth opened the door. Candidate S. That's me, Daniel said, and his voice surprised him by sounding like it belonged to someone who had a right to be there. The interview room was colder than the hallway. The table stretched long, the panel framed by a view of a city that often forgot to look down. Mrs. Latham didn't waste time. Daniel, this is a merit scholarship. Tell us briefly why you. He set his resume on the table and didn't sit until they nodded. He remembered Bennett's note. 3 beats. He placed his palms flat, grounding himself. I'm the son of a woman who taught me that dignity is not a gift from the powerful, he began, voice calm, and that education is a key you can carry even when the world changes the locks. Mr. Hale flipped a page, unimpressed. Your transcript shows inconsistency. Yes, Daniel said. The line isn't straight, but every time it dipped, I learned how to pull it back up. I didn't just study content, I studied how to keep going. Doctor. Patel leaned forward. Tell me about the children you tutor at the church. Daniel's shoulders loosened. They come for food and stay for fractions. We solve for X, but mostly we solve for being seen. Ms. Green watched him as if measuring a bridge for weight. You wrote that a moment changed you. What did you do after it? He felt the marble floor of a different building under his feet, the sting of a shoe grinding paper, the echo of a voice that said he would never be anything. He met Ms. Green's eyes. I decided to learn the language of a system that speaks loudly when people like my mother whisper. I looked for doors. When they were locked, I learned hinges. Silence settled, doing exactly what Bennett had promised. Lifting. Mrs. Latham steepled her fingers. Our scholars attend donor events. They carry the foundation's name. How will you represent us? By remembering I represent more than you, he said softly, not defiant, just true. My block. My church. My mother. If I walk into a room with your name on my badge, I want you to be proud, but I need them to feel seen. Mr. Hale's jaw worked, a tick of annoyance or reconsideration. Hard to tell. And what if law school doesn't happen? Then I'll still be useful, Daniel said. Because what you're investing in is not just a profession, It's a person who knows how to multiply chances. If the path changes, the math doesn't. Ms. Green glanced at a sheet, then at him. Who is Clara? His throat tightened, but he didn't let it close. My mother, he said. The reason I know the difference between pride and purpose. The first amen. Outside, Clara stopped pacing. She felt something shift, like a rope finally catching in the right notch. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you." A nudge of providence. As the interview wound down, Mrs. Latham checked a final box. We appreciate your time. You'll hear from us within... A knock at the door. Ruth stepped in, apologetic. Excuse me, Mrs. Latham. Additional documentation just arrived for Candidate S, a character affidavit from Community Legal Aid, and an addendum from the library verifying hours and leadership. Ms. Green held out her hand for the papers, scanning quickly, her eyebrow lifted slightly at a line. It appears, she said, you have people in the city who vouch for what we hope our scholars become. Daniel didn't look at the ceiling. He didn't need to. Gratitude moved through him like air. Mrs. Latham nodded. Thank you, Daniel, that will be all for now. He stood, bowed his head slightly, not as a gesture of lesser worth but of respect for a process he planned to outgrow. At the door, he turned. If I'm selected, he said, I won't waste it. Mr. Hale didn't smile, but he didn't frown either. We'll be in touch. The embrace. The elevator opened onto the lobby, and there she was, Clara, standing as if she had been created for this exact moment. Daniel didn't care who watched. He walked straight into her arms. She held him like an anchor and a sail in the same embrace. How did it go? She asked into his shoulder. I told the truth, he said. And help came right on time. It always does. She whispered. God is never late. He's just not on our clock. They stepped into the sunlight. The city didn't clap, but heaven might have. At the corner, a delivery truck honked and a flock of pigeons rose like confetti. Daniel laughed, surprised by joy. Small, stubborn, undeniable. Clara handed him the paper bag. Eat. He opened it, found the sandwich, the apple, and a second note he hadn't noticed. Never apologize for shining after they tried to dim you. He looked at her. Did you write this? She smiled sideways. Mrs. Coleman. She said to tell you she made extra cornbread for the celebration we can't see yet. They started down the steps together, not knowing what the committee would decide, but certain of who they were walking out as. Night again. The lamp on Daniel's desk hummed, its weak light fighting against the dark. His notebook lay open beside test prep guides borrowed from the library, their covers cracked, pages dog-eared. Equations sprawled across one sheet, essay prompts on another. The clock read 12:47 a.m. His eyes burned. He rubbed them, then pushed on. Through the thin wall, Clara coughed softly. The sound cut him deeper than any exam question. She was working 2 shifts now, mornings at the Collins mansion, nights cleaning offices downtown. She returned after midnight with her shoes in her hands, trying not to wake him. But he always knew. He always heard. That evening, he had spotted the callus on her thumb, fresh from scrubbing, and wanted to tell her to stop. But he also saw the pride in her eyes when she asked, "How's the essay draft?" and bit his tongue. Every sacrifice had become part of his fuel, and yet the weight was crushing. The failing body. On a Tuesday morning, Daniel collapsed into his seat in math class, head on the desk. His pencil rolled to the floor. Mr. S., Mrs. Whitaker snapped, "We are not running a nap house." Snickers floated from the back. Brandon leaned in, smirking. "What's wrong, Danny? Too busy saving the world to get some sleep?" Daniel lifted his head slowly, eyes heavy, jaw tight. Too busy preparing for it. The class went quiet for a second. Then Brandon laughed, loud enough for the room. But a few students didn't join. A few glanced at Daniel differently, as if noticing for the first time the quiet war he was fighting. At lunch, his hands trembled so much he nearly spilled his tray. He forced himself to eat every bite, knowing hunger was an enemy he couldn't afford. The stolen hours. He carved study hours from places they didn't fit. 10 minutes on the bus, balancing a prep book on his knees. 15 minutes in the church basement before tutoring the kids. Another hour at the library until Ms. Rivera flicked the lights twice, her gentle signal that closing time had come. Then home, where Clara had left tea on the stove and encouragement on scraps of paper. 1 page at a time. God is greater than grades. The lamp burns because you keep refilling it. He taped the notes around his desk until they looked like a fortress of words. Clara's secret one. Thursday, Daniel came home early from school to find Clara sitting on the couch, shoes still on, her head in her hands. A bottle of pain cream sat beside her. She jumped when she saw him. "You're home already, I was just resting." But her hand trembled when she reached for the cream. "Mom," he said gently. "How bad is it?" "Nothing, just knees talking back. Old friends." He knelt in front of her, holding her hand. "Don't hide from me, you're pushing too hard." She smiled through the ache. "So are you. That's why I can't stop. If you're climbing, I'll hold the rope until my fingers bleed." He wanted to argue, but tears blurred his vision. Instead, he whispered, "Then we climb together." The near collapse. The Saturday before his practice test, Daniel stayed up all night revising. By morning, his body betrayed him. On the way to the church kitchen, he stumbled, dizziness spinning the sidewalk. Mrs. Coleman caught him by the elbow as he nearly fell. "Baby, you're burning the candle at both ends," she scolded, eyes sharp with worry. "I can't stop now," he said, breath ragged. "You can't win the war if you collapse before the battle." She marched him inside, made him sit with a bowl of soup meant for the guests. Clara arrived minutes later, panic etched into her face. "Daniel," she knelt beside him, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead. "You're not a machine." He tried to laugh weakly. "Machines don't dream." Clara held his hand, her voice trembling. "I don't need a lawyer if it costs me my son. Promise me you'll take care of yourself." He squeezed her hand. "I promise. As long as you promise the same." They looked at each other. Two fighters stitched together by love, both guilty of the same crime, giving too much without rest. The whisper in the dark. That night, after Clara fell asleep on the couch, Daniel slipped outside to the tiny porch. The city buzzed in the distance. He opened his notebook, staring at blank pages. His chest felt heavy, as if every sacrifice might still not be enough. He whispered into the night, "God, I'm scared. What if all this still doesn't open the door? What if he was right and I'll never be anything?" The wind stirred. From a window nearby, faint music drifted, a gospel choir recording someone was playing. The words weren't clear, but the rhythm carried the echo of faith, like a heartbeat that refused to stop. Daniel closed his eyes. He remembered Bennett's words. "Luck is preparation meeting a door that finally cracks open." He remembered Ms. Rivera's stubborn smile, Mrs. Coleman's laughter, Alvarez's affidavit, Ruth's whisper, "Breathe from your belly." He remembered Clara's voice above all. God does not abandon the righteous. Slowly, he picked up his pen and wrote until the fear bent into resolve. The turning point 2 weeks later, Daniel took the official entrance exam. He walked into the testing center not as a boy terrified of failing, but as a son carrying an army of sacrifices on his back. Every question felt like a brick, heavy and sharp. But he laid them one by one, steady hands building a road. He heard Clara's voice in every silence. "Keep walking." When he walked out 4 hours later, the sky had broken open into sunlight. He didn't know his score yet, but he knew something had shifted. Sacrifices had not broken him. They had shaped him. Morning. The apartment was hushed, a thin gray light flattening the edges of everything. Daniel's phone vibrated on the nightstand. He reached for it half asleep, thumb sliding over the screen. Subject: scholarship status, decision. The breath left his chest before he even opened it. He tapped. Dear Daniel, thank you for your application. After careful review, we regret to inform you that you have not advanced to the finalist cohort. While your story moved us, composite metrics did not meet our current threshold. We wish you the best in your future endeavors. The words blurred. Regret to inform. Composite metrics. Threshold. He stared at the ceiling. Something inside went quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after a door slams hard enough to shake the building. From the kitchen, Clara's kettle clicked off. Breakfast, my son. He swallowed. I'm not hungry. A pause. Then her soft footsteps. Clara stood in the doorway, reading his face without seeing the screen. She knew. Mothers know. She came to the bed and sat beside him, fingers smoothing the blanket like flattening a storm. Tell me. He handed her the phone. She read. She didn't gasp. She didn't crumble. She nodded once as if the world had just told a predictable lie. We are not made of their thresholds, she said. We are made of God's promises. He wanted to believe. He wanted to wear her strength like a shield. But the email pulsed at the edge of his vision, a bruise that kept blooming. Mom, I can't keep making you work 2 shifts for a maybe. I don't work for a maybe, she replied. I work for a purpose. What if purpose can't pay tuition? She held his gaze. Then purpose will pay courage, and courage buys miracles. He closed his eyes, the words somehow heavier and lighter at the same time. The public announcement. At school, bad news travels in polite envelopes. Mrs. Whitaker stood at the front of class with a list. Congratulations to those invited to the finalists' brunch at the Collins Center. She read 3 names. Brandon was last, but he said, present like a king counting his gold. Eyes turned, some sympathetic, some hungry. Brandon slid Daniel a look that was almost tender with triumph. Tough break, Danny. The brunch waffles are amazing. I'll tell you how they taste. Daniel kept his face still. His hands found the edge of his desk and held on. Later, Ms. Clarkson stopped him in the hall, the practiced sorrow of a professional no on her face. I'm sorry, Daniel. These processes are competitive. The trade job fair is still open today until 4. She held out a flyer like a life raft made of lead. It's stable work, good benefits, maintenance, custodial, warehouse. You'd be an asset. The word custodial pinched a nerve he hadn't known was raw. Not because the work wasn't worthy, it was. Because somewhere in marble halls, a man had once mapped his future and used that word like a cage. He took the flyer. I'll think about it. I be practical, she urged, relief already loosening her shoulders as if the story had neatly resolved. The breaking point. After school, Daniel didn't go to the library. He walked aimlessly, the city a blurred parade. Clouds gathered. Wind pulled at street corner posters, shredding their corners into confetti. He ended up at the church anyway because gravity has a memory. The basement kitchen smelled of onions and soap. Mrs. Coleman waved from behind a stack of trays. You're early, baby, the kids will be... She froze, reading his face. What happened? He handed her the phone with the email. She scanned it, jaw setting in a way that made the air warmer. They said no to a seed, she said, the sentence like a verdict. They'll be sorry when the tree arrives. He tried to smile. It didn't come. At a folding table nearby, 2 little boys hunched over worksheets. One looked up. Mister. Daniel, are you going to help me with the word problem? His chest tightened. Not today, champ. I need to. Okay, the boy said, disappointment a small, brave thing in his voice. Maybe tomorrow. Daniel nodded, retreating to the storage room. He sat on a milk crate between bags of flour. And then finally his body did what his pride had forbidden. He cried. Quietly at first, then like a dam that understood its job was over. Clara found him there. She didn't speak. She sat on the floor beside him, back against the wall, knees pulled up like a girl half her age. She reached for his hand. I am allowed to be strong, she whispered, and you are allowed to break. We trade turns. That's how we make it. He leaned into her shoulder, shaking. They stayed like that until grief emptied itself enough to let breath return. The offer. He almost took. At 3:20 p.m., Daniel stood in the gym where the trade fair roared with bright banners and louder promises. Recruiters smiled too wide. Clipboards multiplied. He drifted from booth to booth, each pitch a kind of kindness that felt like surrender. At a custodial services table, a manager with a friendly face said, "We hire hard workers, steady hours, union track if you stay the course. You'd be great, son." Daniel's fingers hovered over the pen. The application form was simple. Simple is seductive when life keeps handing you labyrinths. He thought of Clara's calloused hands, of Mr. Bennett's tie knot, of Ms. Rivera's bus passes, of Alvarez's affidavit, of Ruth's whisper. Big rooms love to scare good voices. He thought of Brandon's brunch waffles. He put the pen down. "I'm sorry," he said, voice shaking but clear. "Not today." He walked out into air that smelled like rain. The courage to appeal. Back at the library, Ms. Rivera looked up, reading everything on his face in a heartbeat. "Sit," she said. "I'll get the We Fight Back folder." She returned with tissues, 2 forms, and a blank email template. "Foundations deny good kids every day and change their minds every week," she said. "You're going to write an appeal, not a complaint, a case." "Appeals are allowed?" "Everything is allowed when it's respectful and true." He stared at the blinking cursor. The first sentence came slow like a tide. The second arrived as if it had been waiting in the hallway. "Thank you for considering my application. I accept your decision, but I ask permission to submit additional context you may find relevant. I do not ask you to lower your standard. I ask you to measure everything you say you value." He wrote about the tutoring, the church kitchen, the exam he had taken on 2 borrowed bus passes. He did not write about the shoe on his notebook. He did not write about the marble hall or the laugh that became knives. He wrote instead about the way he had learned to tell the truth in rooms designed for echo. Ms. Rivera hovered like a lighthouse, changing nothing, suggesting only commas that made the waves understandable. "We'll send it to the general inbox," she said, "and CC the panelist who made eye contact when nobody else did." "Ms. Green," Daniel said, remembering the posture like a promise. They hit send. The error in the shadows. 10 minutes later, his inbox pinged. An auto reply. "Thank you for your message. Due to high volume." He sighed. Then another ping. Subject: Appeal received. Follow-up required. The sender's name: Ruth H. Ruth, the receptionist with grandma hands. "Daniel, this is Ruth from the waiting room. I'm not supposed to do this, but I reviewed your file before it closed. Something felt off. The system uploaded your test score using the wrong concordance scale. It shaved points it shouldn't have. I flagged it to the director." No promises. "Hold steady." His heart stumbled. He reread the words. Wrong scale. Shaved points. Flagged. He forwarded the email to Ms. Rivera with shaking hands. She pressed her palm to the table, as if to keep the building from lifting off. "It happens more than you think," she said through clenched teeth. "When the scales were made without kids like you in mind, they mismeasure. All the time." The phone call. The phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. "Daniel, this is Ms. Green." Her voice was calm, crisp, carrying a warmth that didn't apologize for its firmness. "Yes, ma'am. I read your appeal. I've also been informed of a scoring discrepancy. Here's what I can offer. There is a bridge scholar slot, conditional. It's designed for candidates whose numbers are close but whose trajectory is undeniable." Silence. He almost dropped the phone. "Conditional? You'll sit for a live assessment, timed writing, logic drills, group problem solving. You'll also answer questions from a community panel, not donors. If you pass, the scholarship triggers. If you don't, you still walk out with a mentorship track and fee waivers for state applications." "When?" "Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. Collins Center again. Room 6 this time. Bring nothing but your mind." He closed his eyes. "I'll be there." "One more thing," Ms. Green added. "Do not come to perform pain. Come to demonstrate capacity." Yes, ma'am. And Daniel? Ma'am? Whether we fund you or not, the way you wrote that appeal, that is law in embryo. The line clicked. He stood in the quiet roar of the library, trembling with a new kind of fear. The kind that feels like a door actually creaking. Night work. Part 2. Clara packed cornbread into a tin as if scholarships required carbs. Bridge scholars, she repeated, tasting the words. Bridges are for crossing. It's not guaranteed, he said. Neither is sunrise. But it comes. They prayed at the kitchen table, hands clasped, heads bowed over a city that had learned their names whether it wanted to or not. After midnight, Daniel sat with a legal pad. He didn't study facts. He rehearsed truth. He wrote 3 bullet points and circled them. Who I am, not a number, a pattern. What I've overcome, not theatrics, evidence. How I multiply investment, not charity, return. He slipped Bennett's old note from his wallet and read it again. Speak slow. Let silence do some of the lifting. He breathed from his belly. And the lobby before dawn, 7:32 a.m. The Collins Center lobby was quieter than last time. Fewer suits, more denim and church shoes. He recognized the posture of the candidates, shoulders squared with borrowed courage. Ruth waved him over. Room 6 is down the hall, she said. Remember what I told you. Breathe. She leaned closer. And for what it's worth, I retired last year. I came back today, for this. Daniel swallowed a lump that had ambition to be a river. Thank you. He turned and saw Mr. Bennett standing by the elevator, hands in his pockets, a small smile like a secret. Library opens late on Saturdays, Bennett said. Figured this room needed a witness. He adjusted Daniel's tie the smallest fraction. Go teach them what a threshold is for. Clara stood outside just beyond the glass, her palm on the door. He could feel the warmth through air. Courage arrives, wearing quiet shoes. A staffer opened room 6. No polished donors, no pearl necklaces. The panel was different. A public school principal, a community organizer, a small business owner, a nurse, and Ms. Green at the far end, legal pad ready, eyes steady. On each desk, a single sheet of paper, a pencil, a prompt. Daniel sat. The clock ticked. He read the prompt. A city proposes a policy to close a neighborhood library to fund a private security expansion. Argue for or against, using evidence and addressing counter-arguments. He stared at the words. Then a slow smile, the kind that happens when the universe accidentally asks you to talk about your own heartbeat. He began to write. He argued with data he had inhaled from Ms. Rivera's flyers. Literacy rates, crime prevention through education, community hubs. He described the librarian who knew which computer would load even when the internet sulked. He noted cost-benefit, not in dollars alone, but in future taxpayers taught to love the laws they obey. He addressed counter-arguments with respect, carving space where enemies could become allies if someone would just bring a table. When they called time, his hand cramped. He exhaled. Next came logic drills. Group problem solving. A scenario where 2 candidates were given 3 minutes to plan a meal for 50 with only $100 and a broken stove. Daniel smiled and said, We make soup. Soup stretches. We borrow the church pot. The panel laughed, not at him, but with the relief of hearing practicality masquerading as genius. Finally, questions. The organizer leaned forward. Say you get this scholarship. Who else gets it because you did? Every kid I tutor, he said, because I'll build a ladder with my syllabus. The nurse asked, When you fail, and you will, what will you do? Define the failure correctly, he said. If I miss a grade, I adjust. If I hurt a person, I repair. Ms. Green set her pen down. Last question. If the person who once told you that you'd be nothing were in this room, what would you say? He felt the marble floor of another building, the sting, the old echo. He looked at the panel and beyond them into a future that finally did not flinch. Nothing, he said. I would say nothing. I would let the work answer. Silence did the lifting. Ms. Green inclined her head, the smallest bow. Thank you, Daniel. He stood. His legs trembled. He didn't know if he had won anything, but he knew suddenly and completely that he had not lost himself. He walked into the hallway where Ruth waited with a cup of water. Breathe, she said. He did. Down the corridor, the elevator chimed. Doors slid open. A figure stepped out in a suit that cost tuition. Richard Collins. Daniel froze. Collins strode past with a board member, eyes scanning a folder, not the public. He didn't see Daniel. The world was still arranged to make that easy. It didn't matter. Daniel turned toward the lobby, toward the sunlight beyond the glass, where Clara stood and Mrs. Coleman waved and Mr. Bennett tipped an imaginary hat. Sunday evening. The city glowed with the restless light of windows that never sleep. Daniel sat at the kitchen table with a cup of lukewarm tea, the legal pad from the bridge assessment still open. He didn't dare hope loudly. Hope, when mishandled, can bruise. Clara set a plate of cornbread down and pretended not to watch him check his phone every 3 minutes. Eat before you faint, she said, smiling with tired eyes. I'm not faint, he lied. His phone buzzed. An unknown number. His heart tripped, then ran. Hello? Daniel, it's Ms. Green. Her voice carried the calm of someone who respected words enough not to waste them. He stood without meaning to. Yes, ma'am. I'll be direct. The Bridge Scholars panel voted. Your assessment ranked first. Silence flooded the room, then broke like dawn. First? First, she said. The foundation will extend a full scholarship under the Bridge provision. Tuition, books, fees. There's more. A small stipend for living expenses, conditional on your continued service hours and GPA. Clara covered her mouth, eyes filling. A sound escaped her. Half laugh, half prayer. Conditional? Daniel asked, forcing his brain to catch up. Conditional, Ms. Green confirmed. Not because we doubt you, but because we invest in momentum. Keep doing what you're doing, and the support remains. Across the table, Clara folded both hands as if she were steadying a cup only she could see. Thank you, Daniel said, the words too small for his throat. Don't thank me, Ms. Green replied. Thank the work. Thank the people who trained your courage. A pause, then the twist. One more detail. The scholarship will not be dispersed through the Collins Foundation General Fund. It will route via an independent civil rights endowment the foundation is required to manage by agreement, which protects Bridge awards from donor influence. He exhaled. A quiet relief he didn't know he needed. You'll receive the formal letter in the morning, she added. But I didn't want you to go to bed wondering. I won't, he said, and for once it felt true. Daniel? Yes? There's room for one more Bridge slot. You and the panel convinced the board to expand it. 2 students this year instead of 1. He blinked, stunned. Who's the other? A girl from South Bronx, first in her family to finish high school. You'll meet at orientation. Thank you, he whispered. Make it impossible for anyone to shrink the program next year. Click. Daniel lowered the phone like it was made of glass. Clara was already on her feet. She hugged him so hard he left the floor for a second. God keeps receipts, she said into his shoulder. He pays in good time. The letter that changed the air. Monday, 7:41 a.m. The official email arrived with the subject line, Award Confirmation, Bridge Scholars Full Funding. It wasn't poetic. It didn't need to be. Attached, a PDF with seals and signatures, dates and decimals, and a paragraph that made the room taller. In recognition of demonstrated resilience, leadership in community service, excellence in assessment, and potential to contribute to the common good. Clara printed 3 copies at the church office. Mrs. Coleman held one like a newborn. I told you they miscounted a seed, she crowed. Pastor read the letter, then placed his hand on Daniel's head for a quick prayer that felt like a crown. The hallway. Where news travels at school, murmurs moved faster than announcements. By second period, people were already checking their phones. Brandon intercepted him near the lockers. His usual smirk flickered, confused. "Thought you were out," he said. "So did I," Daniel answered. "My dad says bridge is like a pity track." Daniel didn't bite. "My panel says I ranked first," he replied. Calm. Brandon's jaw tightened. A teacher passed. The moment dissolved without a referee. "Ms." Clarkson stepped from her office like someone hearing the end of a story she hadn't predicted. "Daniel, congratulations." The word cost her something. She paid it anyway. "Thank you," he said gently, leaving the door open for her to walk through later as an ally, not a skeptic. Mrs. Whitaker held up the printed letter in front of the class. "Sometimes the line isn't straight," she murmured, not loudly enough to count as confession, but honest enough to help. The library that wouldn't close that afternoon, the library felt like a living room. Ms. Rivera had taped a handwritten sign to the desk. "Bridge scholar at work, do not distract, unless you're bringing snacks." Someone brought donuts anyway. Mr. Bennett arrived with a manila folder. "I had a hunch," he said, placing it in Daniel's hands. Inside, a list he'd been building for months. Local mentorship programs, pre-law summer institute, a public interest law office that needed interns who could listen. "I don't know how to repay—" "You already are," Bennett cut in, "by becoming the kind of man who makes lists like this for someone else." Daniel took a donut he hadn't earned and saved it for Clara. The stipend that meant dignity. That night, the stipend letter translated into small mercies. Bus passes that didn't need to be begged. Textbooks that didn't arrive 2 editions too late. The electric bill paid before the reminder notice. Clara took off her shoes and sat without flinching. Daniel watched the relief move through her like light learning a room. "We're still us," she said, smiling. "Just us with a little air around the edges." A call from Alvarez Tuesday, 5:55 p.m. Mr. Alvarez called from the legal aid office. "2 things," he said. "First, I knew it. Second, I'd like you to come by next week. I host a youth rights night once a month. We need someone who speaks both block and brief. I can pay a small stipend. Mostly I pay in keys." "Keys?" "To rooms you didn't know you could enter," Alvarez said. "Come learn how to hold the door." "I'll be there." The newspaper that got it half right. A small neighborhood paper ran a story. "Local teen wins scholarship after second chance tryout." The photo was grainy. Daniel's tie looked crooked. The headline made it sound like charity. Ms. Green emailed a private note. It was not a second chance, it was the first fair one. Clara cut the article and taped it to the fridge anyway. Imperfect recognition is still recognition, and a mother knows how to celebrate the evidence she can see. The phone that would not stop calls and texts crowded the evening. The church kids sent a video of them chanting, "Bridge, bridge, bridge." Mrs. Coleman added a caption, "We start where you started." Ruth left a voicemail Daniel saved to listen to on hard days. "This is Ruth. I've worked 100 lobbies. I don't call many people back. Breathe, baby. Big rooms aren't so big when you learn their echoes." The quiet after applause. Late that night, when the apartment finally quieted, Daniel stood at the window, phone dark in his hand. The city's hum softened. He pressed his forehead to the glass and whispered, not to the room, not to the ceiling, but to the space that had kept him this long. "Thank you." Behind him, Clara folded laundry, humming a hymn her mother had hummed before her. "You know what this means?" she said, as if answering his prayer. "Orientation?" "That and—" She lifted an eyebrow. He smiled slowly, understanding. "And I keep serving. I keep studying. I keep showing up. That's my son." A seed multiplies Wednesday. The church kitchen overflowed. More kids than usual. Word had traveled that the tutor who explained fractions like magic had won something big. Daniel arrived with new notebooks he'd bought using the stipend, 12 of them, wrapped in twine. He placed one before each child like a quiet announcement. "We're all going somewhere. Write your name," he said. "Spell it like a promise." He knelt beside the smallest boy from the other day, the one who'd asked for help with the word problem. "Ready now?" The boy nodded, grinning. They bent over the page together. The room buzzed like hope. The Unimaginable, Part 2. That weekend, an email landed with a subject line he didn't recognize. Opportunity, summer enrichment, fully funded. Ms. Green had recommended him for a pre-law immersion at a state university. Tuition covered, travel covered. A note at the bottom. Based on community recommendation, Bennett, Rivera, Alvarez, Coleman. He laughed out loud, an unguarded boyish sound he hadn't made in months. Clara peeked from the doorway, eyebrows high. "What now?" "Another door," he said. "They keep opening. Then we keep walking," she smiled. A house built of paper and faith. They cleared a corner of the living room and made a wall of proof. Scholarship letter, bridge panel results, orientation schedule, pre-law immersion confirmation, a sticky note that simply said, Psalm 37. Clara added the dictionary that once sat on his pillow. Daniel added the battered blue notebook that once lay under a shoe. He held the notebook a moment longer than necessary, then placed it like a cornerstone. "Never again," he whispered. Clara took his hand. "Never again," she echoed. "Not because they changed, because you did." They stood together in front of the wall, not worshiping paper, but honoring the God who had turned paper into doors. 4 years later. Morning light poured through the stained glass windows of a university auditorium. Caps and gowns formed a sea of black, a tide of stories stitched with sleepless nights. Daniel stood in line, tassel brushing his cheek, palms damp but steady. When the dean called his name, the room tilted, not from nerves but from the weight of memory finally lifting. "Daniel Santos," the dean announced, Bachelor of Arts, summa cum laude, minor in Ethics and Public Policy. Clara screamed like a choir by herself. Mrs. Coleman clapped until her hands ached. Ms. Rivera waved a little library card in the air like a flag. Mr. Bennett stood in the aisle and didn't clap. He saluted. Mr. Alvarez wiped his eyes, then pretended it was dust. Daniel crossed the stage. The diploma met his hands with the soft authority of paper that had learned to be iron. He shook the dean's hand and glanced up. For a second, the auditorium ceiling looked like a marble hall he had once fled. He didn't flinch. He smiled, small and sure, the way people do when they finally see themselves as they were always meant to be seen. The choice. After the ceremony, Ms. Green found him under an oak tree. "Law school admissions will wait," she said, "but a case won't. We have an intake this week, household workers alleging unpaid overtime, intimidation, and retaliation. We need someone to help gather statements who speaks block and brief." Daniel's eyes sharpened. "Whose house?" She held his gaze. "A conglomerate of properties, including one owned by the Collins Family Trust." A breeze cut through the June heat. Somewhere, a leaf turned over. "I'll do it," he said. Packing the evidence. The next day, Daniel laid his tools on the kitchen table like a surgeon. Legal pad, recorder, copies of workers' rights pamphlets in English and Spanish, a slender folder of case law Mr. Alvarez had flagged, and, on top, his diploma in its hard, dark cover. Clara watched, hands folded. "You don't need to carry that," she said, nodding at the diploma. "I do," he replied. "For them? No. For me. For the hallway." She nodded, understanding. "If that building shakes you, remember, the ground is yours too." The phone calls. He started with the people who had once whispered hello in the Collins mansion, and then learned to walk without making sound. 1 cook, 2 cleaners, a gardener who had worked through fevers. A night porter who had signed papers he couldn't read because the job was oxygen. Their stories matched in the places that mattered. Shifts stretched beyond timesheets. Threats disguised as professional standards. A revolving door of contractors, who were employees in everything but dignity. Daniel listened without rushing. He wrote without drama. He thanked people by name. It took 3 days to build a chorus out of solos. When the list was ready, Ms. Green scheduled a site visit. "I'll handle the legal notice," she said. "You handle the past." He knew what she meant. The drive. They didn't own a car. Mr. Bennett tossed Daniel his keys. "Borrow mine," he said. "It's old but honest, like me." "You coming?" Daniel asked. "No, I'll be where I always am, in the background, making sure the lights work." Clara met them at the curb with a brown paper bag, sandwiches, 2 apples, and a note folded twice. "Read when it's too quiet," she told him, kissing his cheek. "And when it's too loud." He slid the note into his jacket pocket next to the recorder, started the car, and headed toward the part of the city where sidewalks held their breath. The gate. The Collins mansion looked smaller than his memory, which made a different kind of sense. Fear is an architect that always overbuilds. A security guard stepped forward, palm up. "Appointments only." "We have one," Ms. Green replied, crisp as a letterhead. She handed over a sheet embossed with a seal, Notice of Inquiry and Worker Interviews, Authorized Access. The guard scanned the page, met Ms. Green's lawyerly calm, and pressed the gate button with a finger that had learned to recognize inevitability. The iron swung inward like a bow. Daniel drove in. Tires whispered over the immaculate drive. He kept his shoulders square, his breath steady. The house rose into view. The stone, the glass, the steps where he had once carried trays and shame. "Breathe from your belly," he heard Ruth's voice say from another lifetime. He did. The hall inside, the air smelled the same, polish and roses and the ghost of a piano. Portraits watched, footsteps echoed. Daniel felt the old ache stretch its legs. He unclenched his jaw, found the present, and walked into it. They set up in a side parlor, neutral carpet, a fireplace that had never been cold, 2 chairs, a pitcher of water. Ms. Green laid out forms with the elegance of a surgeon laying out tools. Daniel placed the rights pamphlets in a neat stack, then set his diploma on the table, not to flaunt, but to anchor himself. The first housekeeper walked in. Middle-aged, shoulders tight. She saw the diploma first, then his face, and her spine loosened a fraction. "We'll speak in your language," Daniel said softly. "And in mine. Both count." She nodded, sat, and exhaled a story she had held inside for years. One by one they came. The gardener with sun-baked hands. The night porter who kept saying, "I thought this was normal," until Daniel said, "It isn't," and the man cried without apology. A young woman, barely 20, whose calendar had been rearranged without consent, whose days off had turned into favors. Their words braided into a rope. In the hall, staff moved quieter than usual. The mansion listened through its walls. The footstep. By mid-afternoon, a shadow crossed the threshold. The room cooled half a degree. Richard Collins stepped in, crisp suit, silver hair, a posture that mistook height for worth. His eyes slid across the room and landed on Daniel, then on the diploma beside him. "You," Collins said, surprise turning quickly into annoyance, then into something he hadn't practiced much. Uncertainty. "Good afternoon, Mr. Collins," Daniel replied, voice even. "We're conducting interviews under authorized notice. You should have received copies." This is a private residence," Collins snapped. "You don't get to stage whatever this is in my home." Ms. Green stood, sliding a document across the table. "Counsel, I'm Ms. Green. Here is the authorization under the City Ordinance and State Labor Code. You're not on trial, your practices are." Collins flicked the paper with 2 fingers, eyes not tracking, the way men read only what flatters them. Then he looked back at Daniel. "Still carrying around books?" he asked, his voice reaching for a cruelty that used to come easy. Daniel matched his gaze. He didn't look away. "This one carries me," he said, tapping the diploma once. "And it carries people whose names you didn't bother to learn." The room dared to breathe. A second figure appeared in the doorway, a woman in her 40s, severe bun, clipboard like a shield. Ms. Harrington, the household manager. Daniel remembered her from years ago. a scheduler with a steel smile. She looked at him now as if recognizing a song she'd dismissed before it found a radio. "Mr. Collins," she said carefully, "the legal notice is valid. If we interfere, we expose the family to additional penalties." Collins's jaw reacted. He forced a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Proceed," he said, the word sour. He turned to leave, then paused in the doorway, thrown by something he couldn't quantify. Maybe it was the way the staff stood a little taller today. Maybe it was the way Daniel's quiet refused to apologize. "You think you've won something?" he said. Daniel's answer was simple. "I haven't won," he said. "They will." Collins's mouth twitched. He left without slamming the door, which was its own kind of concession. The house remembers. After he was gone, an older woman, Maria, a laundress with hands like soft sandpaper, hovered at the threshold. "I saw you when you were small," she whispered in Spanish. "He stepped on your little book. I picked up a page when nobody watched. I kept it in my locker." She opened her palm. A wrinkled scrap rested there, faint pencil lines like veins. A fragment of Daniel's childhood equations saved like a relic. He swallowed hard. "You kept it?" "I knew it belonged to a future," she said. "Some things you don't throw away." He folded her fingers over the scrap. "Keep it until this is over," he said. "Then we'll frame it." She nodded, eyes shining. The ledger. By evening, the folder was heavier. Names, hours, patterns. Ms. Green organized everything with the care of a midwife. Daniel gathered last statements, shook hands, learned names he would not forget. At the doorway, he paused. The hall stretched before him, polished and bright. The staircase rose, white and indifferent. He took a slow step onto the marble, placed his palm on the banister and didn't feel small. He reached into his pocket and unfolded Clara's note. "God didn't bring you this far to leave you in the hallway. Walk." He put the note back, lifted the diploma case from the table and tucked it under his arm. "You ready?" Ms. Green asked, meeting him in the hall. "More than I was yesterday," he said. They moved toward the front door, the house's gaze on their backs. At the threshold, voices rose behind them, low, buzzing staff talking to one another without looking over their shoulders. A new sound in an old place. Daniel stepped into the evening. The sky was bruised purple, healing into blue. Oh, the call. Halfway down the steps, his phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. "Mr. Santos?" A clipped voice. "This is Ellis from Collins Corporate Counsel. We've been informed of your presence on the property. Our client is prepared to cooperate." Daniel heard the quotation marks. "Good. Begin with payroll records for the last 5 years, contractor rosters, and internal emails regarding scheduling and breaks. You'll need to send a formal request." "It's on your desk already," Ms. Green said, leaning in toward the phone. "Timestamp 5:42 p.m. A pause. Paper shuffling through the line. "We'll review," Ellis said, voice cooler than he felt. "Do more than review," Daniel replied. "Repair." He hung up, surprised at the steadiness of his own voice. The gate, again. As they reached the gate, the security guard from earlier lifted a hand. "Sir," he said to Daniel, almost shy, "my wife, she cleans nights, not here, another building. Could you?" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Daniel handed him a pamphlet, wrote his number on the back. "Tell her to call. No more silent hallways." The guard nodded, grateful, threaded with something older, relief. A mother's open door. The car pulled up to their street. Clara waited on the steps, porch light already on, though the sun hadn't finished setting. Daniel stepped out with the diploma under his arm. He didn't raise it yet. He didn't need to. The way he stood told the story. "You went back," she said, reading everything in the dust on his shoes. "I did. And?" He exhaled. "The house remembered me, but today I made it learn my name." She hugged him, and he let the weight of the day transfer into her arms long enough for his spine to reset. Inside, the wall of proof had grown, new pages clipped to old victories, the battered blue notebook centered like an altar. "Tomorrow," Clara said, nodding at the wall. "Tomorrow," he echoed. The teaser that night, an email pinged after midnight, Ms. Green forwarding a meeting notice. Pre-settlement conference scheduled. Parties to appear. Collins, house manager, council, worker representatives. Location: Collins Mansion Grand Hall. Daniel stared at the screen, then at the diploma case on his desk. He opened it, the paper gleaming soft as a promise, and held it up to the light. He pictured the marble steps, the gathered staff, the man who once said, "You will never be anything." He smiled, not sharp, not cruel, just inevitable. "Let the work answer," he whispered. He closed the case, set it beside his legal pad, and turned off the lamp. Outside, the city exhaled. The grand hall. Sunlight spilled through high windows, striking the marble like truth arriving on schedule. A long table divided the room. On one side, Ms. Green, Daniel, Mr. Alvarez, and 2 worker representatives. On the other, Richard Collins, Ms. Harrington, household manager, and Mr. Ellis, corporate counsel, with a stack of files he hoped would look like control. Staff lined the walls, cooks, porters, gardeners, cleaners, standing a little closer to one another than the rules preferred. Near the doorway, Ruth had slipped in as a visitor, with a visitor's badge that fooled no one. Ms. Rivera stood beside her, eyes bright behind librarian calm. Mr. Bennett lingered near a column, hands tucked into his jacket, the way witnesses stand when they know what they've seen will matter. Mrs. Coleman clasped her hands like a choir warming up. And at the back, Clara, posture straight, face lifted, as if she had been waiting for this exact hour since the world began. A grandfather clock ticked with ceremonial arrogance. It didn't know its time had run out. The opening Ms. Green began, voice even, presence wide. "We're here to resolve wage theft, retaliation, and misclassification allegations. We have payroll anomalies across 5 years, forced off-the-clock standards, and rotating contractor labels for employees who meet every legal test of employment. I will present summaries, then we'll hear directly from those affected." She nodded to Daniel. He stood, opened a slim folder, and placed color-coded charts on the table. Hours scheduled versus hours performed. Sick days promised versus sick days denied. Paychecks versus reality. He did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. Math has its own thunder. Mr. Ellis cleared his throat. "We dispute the characterization, then you'll love the documentation," Ms. Green said, sliding a packet toward him. "Emails, schedules, texts, and a statement you'll recognize." She read, "We keep hours clean on paper. The rest is part of the culture." Ms. Harrington paled. It was her email. The room noticed. Testimony Maria, the laundress, spoke first. Hands clasped, voice soft, Spanish flowing into English through a church volunteer at her side. "I worked 12 hours. They paid for 8. When I asked, they said the machine was down. It was down a year." A murmur rolled the length of the wall. The gardener described heat advisories ignored. The night porter described double shifts when contractors didn't show because they never existed. A young cleaner described pregnancy nausea on marble floors. When I asked to sit, they gave me stares. Mr. Ellis tried to interrupt with policy manuals. Ms. Green slid forward photos of time clocks with "out of service" taped over their mouths. Mr. Alvarez quoted code sections as if reading scripture. The scales tilted. The man who built the hall, Richard Collins, spoke at last, voice polished enough to sell anything but remorse. "This household is managed by professionals. If individual supervisors failed, we will retrain, but we do not accept—" "You accepted the benefits," Ms. Green said without heat. "Lower costs, quieter staff, a running machine greased with unpaid time. If you didn't know, you should have. If you did know, we're already late." Collins's mouth tightened. He turned toward Daniel, finally naming what had unsettled him since the moment he walked in. "I remember you," he said. "You carried a notebook where a tray should have been." "I carried both," Daniel replied. "And now you carry what? A grievance?" "I carry records," Daniel said, "and the future of people you forgot were human." Silence stretched, not awkward but surgical. The proposal Ms. Green placed a settlement sheet on the table, crisp as a verdict. Back pay plus treble damages for all affected staff. 5-year look back. Reclassification of all contractors to employees with full benefits. Written breaks, paid sick leave, overtime compliance monitored quarterly for 2 years by an independent auditor. No retaliation clause, with whistleblower hotline managed offsite. Education and Dignity Fund, $1.5 million endowment for household workers citywide. Legal clinics, ESL, GED prep, and scholarships for workers' children. Public statement acknowledging harm and committing to transparent labor practices. Mr. Ellis sputtered. "These terms are lawful and proportional," Mr. Alvarez said. "Or we litigate. Discovery will be a novel." Ms. Harrington shifted, weighing numbers against the mirror. Collins scanned the room. The staff's faces were steady, abundant, undeniable. Power recognized the moment it stopped being alone. "You're asking me to fund my own vilification," he said. Ms. Green folded her hands. "We're asking you to fund the repair of harm you benefited from." The past enters the room. Ruth stepped forward, visitor's badge crooked, heart straight. "Sir," she said to Collins, voice gentle but made of oak. Big rooms echo. Words spoken here last. She turned to Daniel, eyes shining. "Breathe." He did. Daniel reached into his satchel and laid the battered blue notebook on the table, the one a shoe had once tried to erase. He didn't open it. He let its scars speak. A ripple of recognition ran through the staff. Maria pressed a hand to her mouth. Tears slipped, not of weakness but of relief that the past hadn't been imagined. Collins stared at the notebook, a flicker, discomfort, memory, maybe shame, crossing his features like weather he couldn't command. The turn Ms. Green slid a single-page addendum across. "You'll also transfer the Collins Center's bridge allocation to the Independent Endowment permanently. No more donor interference. Bridge scholars exist because walls did. The walls don't get to curate who climbs them." Mr. Ellis leaned into Collins's ear, whispering sums that tried to sound like logic. Collins weighed money versus headlines, control versus exposure, pride versus gravity. He signed the first signature without looking up, then the second, where the Education and Dignity Fund lived. He hesitated at the public statement, pen hovering. Daniel spoke, not begging, not taunting, simply telling the truth in the language a marble room was forced to respect. "Sir, when you shouted you will never be anything at a boy, everyone learned a lesson. Today they learn a new one. People are not furniture. We're not part of the decor you arrange for your comfort. We are the reason places like this stand or fall." The pen touched paper. Signature. The clock ticked, suddenly ordinary. The statement. They didn't wait for a press conference. Ms. Harrington gathered the staff into the hall. Collins faced them, throat working around words he hadn't practiced. "This household failed you," he said, the first sentence true enough to carry the rest. "Policies will change. Wages will be corrected. Oversight will be independent. The fund will be endowed. He faltered. "I allowed a culture that treated your lives like margins. That ends." The staff didn't applaud. They didn't owe him that. But shoulders dropped, spines rose. Ms. Green stepped back, giving the space to the ones who had earned it. Mr. Alvarez shook hands like closing arguments. Ruth pressed 3 paper cups of water into 3 trembling hands. Ms. Rivera whispered, "Library workshop. We'll make flyers." Mrs. Coleman murmured a thank you to the ceiling that sounded like amen. The diploma. It was time. Daniel lifted his diploma case from the chair. He turned to the staff first, not to Collins. He raised the diploma just enough for them to see, paper that had learned to be iron, and said, "This is for every hour you worked that no one counted. This is for every dream someone stepped on. This is proof that paper can open doors, and that your names belong on every door you walk through to feed your families." Then, only then, he faced Richard Collins. No grin, no spite, just the weight of a sentence 4 years in the making. "You once told a boy, you will never be anything." He lifted the diploma higher, but not as a trophy, as testimony. Today, anything looks like this, and it stands for everyone you tried not to see. The room held its breath. The word justice doesn't always thunder. Sometimes it arrives like a key turning cleanly. Clara's hands came together, not as applause, but as prayer fulfilled. Tears slipped and she let them. Mr. Bennett nodded like a judge aware of a verdict finally read. Ms. Green allowed herself a small private smile. Maria crossed herself and whispered, "Gracias, Dios." The after outside, the steps of the mansion felt different beneath Daniel's shoes, less like marble, more like ground. Staff lingered in the sunlight, exchanging numbers like lifelines, laughing that fragile new laugh people make when fear loosens its grip. Collins didn't follow them to the door. That was also justice. On the sidewalk, the security guard from the gate approached, hat in hand. "My wife called," she cried. Not from fear. Daniel wrote a clinic date on the back of a pamphlet. "See you both Saturday?" Ruth hugged him in a way only grandmothers can, a benediction disguised as a squeeze. "Big rooms?" she said. "Just rooms," he answered. "That's right," Ruth smiled. "Just rooms." The coda. At home, the wall of proof had a new layer. The settlement agreement, the fund charter, a flyer for the first workers' rights workshop, and, centered, a photo someone snapped on a borrowed phone. Daniel in the grand hall, diploma lifted, staff behind him like a choir of quiet victories. Clara stood before it, hand over her heart. "God does not abandon the righteous," she said, as if confirming a weather report the soul already felt. Daniel looked at the battered blue notebook beneath the glass. The page Maria had saved sat beside it, framed. A fragment. A future. He set the diploma down gently, turned to his mother, and rested his forehead against hers for a moment longer than a moment. No words. Just the sound of a promise kept. Outside, the city moved on. Sirens, buses, laughter, a hymn with traffic. Inside, mercy lingered. Fade out. Have you ever returned to the place that broke you, stronger than when you left? Tell us how it ended. Do you believe God's justice may be slow but certain? Share your right-on-time moment. If someone once told you, "You'll never be anything," what would you say to them today? Never lose hope. Justice can take the long road, but it arrives. And when it does, it doesn't just lift one life. It lifts many.